Minister, we are bringing this motion this evening in relation to the cost of living crisis that has been challenging many families and individuals for not just for the course of the last year, but for several years. And in many respects, we've started talking about the cost of living crisis in the context of energy. But it's much wider than that, and it comes back to public services and the sort of double charging that can go on. It goes to groceries and many other items as well in terms of energy. The focus, I suppose, in particular at this moment in time relates to a large extent to the challenges people face at the till. And I'm dealing with countless families day in and day out in Cork who are really struggling under relentless pressure from food costs, energy costs, rent and mortgage costs. There seems to be no end in sight and no respite for these families. This government has failed to provide certainty to households in terms of energy bills, refused to freeze rents for renters or provide relief to hard-pressed mortgage holders, and continue to sit on their hands as food prices soar. And Minister, people are truly at the pin of their collar. They don't seem to understand the urgency that is needed, and there is no coherent strategy to combat spiralling costs. The time to act is now, not to sit in their hands, waiting until the budget in October as food and energy prices continue to soar and soar. And in particular, families are feeling the pressure at the till. The weekly shop for many families is going up by 20 or 30 euros and more for many families. People are going to the till wondering, is there enough on the card to pay for this shop, and trying to decide, if they don't, what will they leave behind if they don't have enough? Will they leave behind the washing up powder, or is it the packet of mints, or the stuff for the kids' school lunches? These are the basic decisions that people are having to make. Fearful of that horrible feeling if it comes up, payment declined. And I know, Minister, there's always been families who have faced these pressure, but more and more now, as they feel the strain of increased energy costs, childcare costs, energy costs, and now when it comes to their groceries. These are the basics: food to feed yourself and your family, detergent to clean clothes, basic household goods. But nearly all of them are increasing now, and people are really feeling it, Minister. So, Minister, we're calling on the Government to do all in its powers to ensure that savings made by supermarkets and large food retailers in respect of falling input costs are passed on to consumers through lower grocery prices. We need the CCPC to investigate this. People badly need a break from the constant barrage of skyrocketing costs, and Government must act on this now.
Count Corley, I move the motion. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. And this is an important PMB. It's important because people need to understand that we are bringing to the attention of the government issues that are very serious, and that the government are listening, and that the government are going to be willing to respond, because that is the genuine fear that people have, is that they are struggling and they are not being listened to and they are not being heard. So we welcome the steps that the government have taken so far. We think that there is a need to be firmer, to be stronger, to be more strident, and to do that bit more for people who are struggling. Food price increases are literally bread and butter, the bread and butter issues that are facing ordinary people. High grocery and food bills continue to put workers and families under significant financial pressure. This pressure has been exacerbated by the failure of the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Public Expenditure and National Development to provide certainty to workers and families in respect of energy bills and mortgage relief from spiralling interest rates. The decision by the Government in Budget 23 to provide rate increases to social welfare recipients and pensioners that fall significantly short of what is required to cope with inflation, despite proposals brought forward by Sinn Féin and others who recognise the need for greater weekly social protection increases, was a disgraceful decision. We've brought forward this motion to demand that Government do all in its power to ensure savings made by supermarkets and large food retailers in respect of falling input costs are passed on to consumers through lower grocery prices. It must be stated clearly and unequivocally that in seeking that savings are passed on to customers, supermarkets and large conglomerates should in no way try to squeeze primary producers who are also themselves under significant pressure. A tool at the Government's disposal is the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, and they should be instructed to urgently investigate possible price gouging in the retail food and grocery sector. At the beginning of March, the ECB highlighted that corporate profiteering contributed twice as much to price rises as wage increases. The ECB stated that price gouging was contributing to price rises as firms are using inflation as an excuse to increase their profit margins. They outlined that company profit margins have been increasing rather than shrinking, as might be expected when input costs rise so sharply. The government and policymakers have repeatedly called for wage restraint, but it is clear that the biggest driver of price rises is companies using inflation as an excuse to increase profit margins, a trend trade unions have described quite rightly as greedflation. Corporate profiteering is a real concern and a significant contributor to inflation. We must question why the government and policymakers at national and European level seek to suppress wages while letting profits rip. The idea that companies have been raising prices in excess of their costs at the expense of consumers and workers should be a concern for all of us. Elements of corporate profiteering are clearly affecting consumers on one hand and primary producers on the other, and both are suffering as a result of price hikes. It's clear the inflation narrative has afforded large companies the opportunity to raise prices, and certain companies are taking advantage of this moment to boost their profits, as was pointed out by the ECB. Everything is going up while real wages are falling. For example, across North County Dublin recently, waste collection charges have increased. One company has a monopoly on waste collection. They've introduced a charge now for brown bin collection, while increasing the charges for green and black bins as well. When I wrote to the Minister on this, he had no answer. The response of the government seems to be for ordinary workers and families, just lie down, accept the price hikes, there's nothing can be done. It seems that whenever something goes wrong in the economy, workers have to pay that price. I can tell you, the people in Fine Gael and Sinn Féin are saying no. Ordinary people are shouldering a huge burden. They are not prepared to prop up the excess profits of huge companies and conglomerates. Solutions and measures are needed that benefit ordinary workers and families as well as primary producers. The government needs to ensure that the downward price pressure on supermarket retail prices is not used against Irish growers and producers who are already under extreme pressure to reduce their prices long before COVID and the war in Ukraine. Over the past 10 years, price pressures on growers has seen many of these businesses collapse. A reduction in the rate of inflation cannot be used as further buying tactic from supermarkets to reduce prices they pay to producers. There will be no growers or producers left if this continues. And Minister, I want to draw your attention to the survey and the research that was conducted by the Unite Trade Union, in which they found that in real terms, wages in the last year have fallen by an average of €76. That is impacting on people and their ability to feed their families and pay their grocery bills.
There are 6 speakers here now, so I think it's just over 2 minutes each that's left. So the next speaker is Patricia Ryan.
I'd like to thank my colleague Louise O'Reilly for bringing this timely motion before the Dáil.
I beg your pardon, sorry, come back. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Minister, I want to address the issue of unsustainability, high grocery and food bills that have been troubling people for far too long. Families and workers across this country are struggling to make ends meet as they grapple with the ever-increasing cost of living. The government's failure to address this issue has left many feeling abandoned and forgotten. The rising cost of food and groceries is not simply as a result of inflation or the war in Ukraine. Corporate super profiteering has contributed twice as much to price rises as wage increases. The phenomenon of greedflation is nothing short of economic exploitation. As pointed out, certain corporations have been taking advantage of their market power to gouge price and pad their profits at the expense of ordinary people. This government's refusal to address this issue is a clear sign of their detachment from the struggles of working families. Their inaction speaks volumes about their priorities. The impact of these rising food costs cannot be understated. Families are forced to make impossible choices between buying food and paying for other essentials such as housing, energy bills and education. We cannot continue to allow this to happen. It is time for you, the government, to take meaningful action to address the issue of greedflation and rising grocery bills. In conclusion, I urge the government to take action now and support our motion. Instruct the CCPC to investigate possible price gouging and do all in your power to ensure savings made by supermarkets and large food retailers in respect of falling input costs are passed on to the consumers. We need immediate action to address this issue and ensure the needs of ordinary workers and families are prioritised, and it is time for change, Minister.
Grocery prices have soared by 17% over the past year, the highest rise ever recorded. This could mean that the average grocery bill could rise by €1,200 a year just to put food on the table if the current trend continues. And we know that the cost of living shows no sign of slowing down. What we are told was a temporary rise in inflation. A reaction to the war in Ukraine has persisted, and running a household is becoming increasingly unaffordable. Prices will not come down on their own. We saw this with petrol and diesel. A slight decrease from the highest prices became the new normal. It's the same with utility bills and grocery bills. Prices will not come down unless action is taken in here to protect workers and their families. The government likes to say no, whether it's on the mortgage interest relief supports or the rising costs of putting food on the table for a family. Food banks are popping up all over the place, and this government will not even consider taking action until the October budget. That's a long way away for a lot of people, and when you see large bills coming through the door and you're wondering how to pay for basics like food. We need to increase weekly social welfare and pension rates to stem the flow of families, and particular pensioners, into food poverty. And we need to secure the food supply chain in Ireland. We grow enough food to feed this island 10 times over. So why is it not reflected in the cost of food? Because we've allowed input costs to go entirely out of control. Diesel costs have doubled, fertiliser costs have tripled. And all of this throws uncertainty over the agriculture sector and drives prices up for the consumer. This is about more than growing lettuce in a window box. This is about protecting both farmer and consumer and creating a system that's fair, less reliant on imports, to the benefit of both. This government are past masters at wait and see, or wait for Europe to take the lead. Well, the consumer price index rose by the 18th month in a row in March. More and more vulnerable families can't wait. We need to do more.
Very glad and pleased to speak on our motion this evening, because prices and corporate greed are soaring while people's standard of living and indeed their hearts are sinking. I'd like to commend Teachta Riley for this PMB, and I'm very pleased that you're not opposing the motion, because I'm sure you're hearing as well that prices in our shops are not normal. The fear of going to do the big shop, which is becoming the much smaller shop, is not normal. And the indifference that the government has to the suffering of its people is not normal either. Groceries are up 17% a year. Food inflation in the 12 weeks to mid-April, almost the same. And the government thus far hasn't even looked at price gouging and corporate profiteering. In North Kildare, people are suffering. Every week when I see them doing the supermarket shop, I see people putting stuff on the till, holding the little extra kind of biscuits, the luxuries back. And I've spotted that quite often when I'm doing the shop. These are our workers and our carers, there are pensioners, our families forced to depend on social welfare, and there seems to be zero compassion from them and zero care. Even though by current spending patterns, they're spending an extra €1,200 a year on groceries. The government message is, yes, we can help you, but we're choosing not to. And that is what people are hearing. That's what people are saying to me. And this is no way for people to live. And this is what they tell me when they get in touch with me. They feel abandoned, they feel unheard, unlistened to, as if they're living in a parallel universe to the government where everything is hunky-dory. Money is rolling into the exchequer through their hard work, but they're left to fend for themselves in a kind of coalition Hunger Games of economic survival. It's not even bread and butter issues anymore. It's bread and spread, and they're trying to spread that spread as thinly as possible to make it last. And it seems that the government is tone deaf. So I think it's time that the government really got themselves in gear. Corporate savings, we have to make sure that that's passed on to the customers. It's not rocket science really, any of it, Minister, but it is your job. And I would like to wish you the best in your new job as well, Minister. Congratulate you on that. And I'm glad to see that you are not opposing our motion.
Minister, parents, families and workers are really struggling with the cost of living crisis. Energy bills, rents, mortgage replacements, groceries, clothes. The list could go on and on. The price of everything is going up and nothing coming down. Last week's Cantor report and the ECB all back this up. People, Minister, are at the pin of their collar. Food poverty is a very real issue, Minister, and you and your government have to get a grip on it. Minister, as my colleague said, I find doing the weekly shopping sometimes heartbreaking when I see parents at a till asking the cashier to stop when she reaches a certain amount, or when I see them putting stuff back because they can't afford it. Minister, this is a lived reality for many, many people out there. All the staples of the weekly shop, they've all gone up in price, be it butter, milk, bread and other items. The war in Ukraine was blamed for the rise in prices. The cost of production has come down, but yeah, prices in our supermarkets still stay the same. It's very simple, Minister. This is price gouging. Some call it greedflation. Whatever it is or it isn't, Minister, it's wrong and it's really, really hurting people. So, Minister, you're meeting with the large supermarkets this week. This is welcome, Minister, but I do think it's a bit late. This should have been done months ago. So it's now time for you to start playing hardball with them. Supermarkets weren't shy, Minister, when they put up their prices overnight. So you're saying you're not opposing our motion tonight, so I take it that you agree with some of our asks. So I'm asking you, Minister, when you meet these supermarket chains, will you ask them to reduce their prices as quickly as they put them up for people? Because our people need it. And Minister, our people are looking at you and are hoping that you will deliver on this.
I also want to commend Deputy Riley for bringing the motion before the House, and also to wish you well in your new post, Minister. But throughout the cost of living crisis, one thing we've consistently raised with you is the urgency of the issues facing people and the need to act accordingly. But again, you consistently fail to do this. You ended the eviction ban with no preparation made for the surge in homeless presentations. You drag your feet on imposing a windfall tax on energy companies who have been posting record profits while people go to food banks. And in the budget, you fail to provide rate increases to social welfare and pension recipients to enable them to cope with inflation. And now with grocery price inflation running at 16.6% in the 3 months to the middle of April, and the ECB highlighting how firms are using inflation to boost their own prices, we find ourselves here appealing again to you, Minister. Last week, Clonmel Community Food Bank ran out of supplies. We get reports of children going to school hungry and unable to focus on their homework. For some, this is going to have longer-term consequences. That's a matter of extreme urgency and a disgrace under your watch. So again, I appeal to you to act, and act now, and instruct the Competition Consumer Protection Commission to investigate possible price gouging and to promote and protect the interests of the welfare of consumers. I've been involved in debates in the Agriculture and Food Supply Chain Bill, which would establish a food regulator, which we in Sinn Féin have been demanding to be responsible for enforcing agri-food unfair trading law, but also having the capacity to address anti-competitive actions. And I'll grant the Minister has tabled some amendments to expand the regulator's ability to analyse data impacting on price and margins. But investigating anti-competitive actions in the agri-food supply chain has been resisted by the Minister. While the majority of the focus at the committee has rightly been on the farmer to get a firm view of anti-competitive measures, we need a regulator to view all that happens along the line up to consumer. We in Sinn Féin have put forward amendments on this, but they've always been voted down. At one end of the agri-food chain, farmers have traditionally been calling out the anti-competitive practices they have to deal with. Now the consumers fall foul of similar practices. When are we going to address what we know is going on so that we can prevent poverty, hunger and all that goes with it, and act to address these issues before they arise? And we appeal again to you, Minister, to act and to address price gouging, give supports that are in line with increased cost of living, and create a food regulator with teeth.
I shocked to Chris Andrews, 2.5.
Thank you to my Sinn Féin colleagues for their work in bringing forward this motion. Perhaps the most visible sign of the cost of living crisis is the continual rise in the cost of food and groceries. Everyone in the household, from the child to the parents, can see the prices rising. This government's approach of sitting on their hands as food prices soar shows clearly how utterly out of touch they are with ordinary workers and their families. What will it take for this government to finally stand on the side of the ordinary workers and their families? Workers are seeing their real wages steadily decrease. At the same time, the price of the finished products produced by the farmers has also been decreasing since last December. Yet the price of food and groceries is rising month after month, up 17% on last year. Supermarket chains are making record profits, all at the expense of ordinary workers and their families. The greed of record profits is running wild, and it needs to be reined in. Companies are clearly using inflation as an excuse to rake in high profits. As the trade unions recently described it so well, they called it greedflation. How far will this government let the price gouging go before saying enough is enough? Workers need to see real and meaningful change by this government. We need to see the government start by instructing the CCPC to investigate possible price gouging in the retail food and grocery sector. We cannot continue to let food prices rise even more. So many workers and families are already under financial pressure. When will enough be enough?
Chapter Dáil, Louise O'Reilly, Marialler and PMB Shaw. The cost of buying groceries in Ireland had soared by more than 15% over the last year by January of 2023. Additionally, the rate of inflation in Irish supermarkets had reached one of the highest levels that was ever recorded by retail. The cost of essential basics has risen sharply and have added to the stresses and pressures families face in the midst of a cost of living crisis and skyrocketing energy bills. It is important that companies are not taking undue advantage from these constantly rising prices of groceries and engaging in profiteering as families are forced to buy essentials at inflated prices. Essentials such as milk, cheese and butter have all increased in price. Consumers are experiencing record food inflation rates, which are also much higher than the general rate of inflation. A 2-litre carton of whole milk has risen by 53 cents, or by over 36% compared to prices last year. A carton of eggs and butter both rose by just over 22%. Everyone is affected, but the people that are least able to absorb these soaring prices are those on welfare benefits, low-income families and the pensioners. Economically disadvantaged households face an even higher effective inflation rate because they spend more on their income on essentials such as energy and basic goods. It is proving very difficult for families to keep their heads above the water as they struggle to cope with a deluge of rising costs across the board. Increased mortgage rates and spiralling rents have added to the financial burden of many households. So rising food prices and the cost of living crisis will have a greater impact on such households and will leave them at greater risk of poverty and will result in a significant fall in their standard of living as well. Many in my constituency of Dublin North West are experiencing hardship as they are unable to keep up with the rising energy prices and the rising cost of groceries. Such households are disproportionately affected by this crisis. There are real long-term consequences for many of these struggling families, and it is affecting their well-being and their mental health, especially as they sink deeper into debt and arrears. The longer the government waits to respond to this energy emergency, to implement measures, the greater the risk there is of families falling into poverty. The government can't be complacent at a time when people are struggling. The least it can do is increase social welfare and pension payments and ensure that savings by retail groups are passed on to consumers. You need to inject a sense of urgency into this crisis, Minister. Thank you.
I want to start off by thanking my colleague Louise O'Reilly for the work that she's done on this bill. And I also want to add and wish you all the best in your new role, Minister, and more importantly, I wish you all the best and I hope you take a hardline approach with that meeting with retailers that you have during the week. Minister, the government is out of touch with the struggles of ordinary workers and families, and I'll explain why. I'm going to talk about one of the most successful grassroots community initiatives in my area, the Condalkin Cares Food Bank. Yes, to the government's shame, a food bank is very, very successful in my area. The Condalkin Cares Food Bank is available to support any person experiencing food poverty, no matter what the reasons. And there's a multitude of reasons why people are accessing the service, but the cost of living is number one on it. It was originally set up in Condalkin, but it's expanded into Lucan, Palmerstown, Brittis, Sagard, Racool and Newcastle. over the last couple of the last year or so. There's currently 650 people a week who are dependent on this food bank. The food bank is based in Quarryvale Family Resource Centre, and it's run by Karen Johnson and her team. I met Karen over in Bushwells there at the annual report, the launch of the annual report, and I just want to thank them for all the work that they do on behalf of my community. Minister, the pressure that ordinary families are feeling in my area just to put food on the table cannot be overestimated. I'm aware of people in my area who walk out what time, they go to do their shop on a daily basis, and they go to the section in the shop where the food is either out of date that day or the next day because they will get a reduction on the prices, simply to cut down on the spiralling increase in costs. Grocery prices have increased by 17% over the last year, and the Sinn Féin motion calls on the government to do all in its power to ensure savings made by supermarkets and large food retailers are passed on to the consumers through lower grocery prices. The Mental Health Reform Minister also contacted me today to inform me of the cost of living problems which I know about faced by people living with mental health difficulties. People with psychosocial disabilities, which are people living with long-standing mental health difficulties, have higher costs of living and are at a risk of living in consistent poverty. The Cost of Disability report in 2011 shows that the average cost of having a mental health difficulty amounts to £13,000 per year. It's actually between 9 to 13,000 per year. This is additional to the general cost of living, and now you have the additional increases in the cost of living, and this is a significant financial burden for these people to bear. This group is more adversely affected by the increases in cost of living more than other groups. And I know you said that the government is not opposing this motion today, and that's to be welcome, but Minister, it's not enough. You need to go further. You need to implement all the actions that are in the Sinn Féin motion. You criticise Sinn Féin all the time of not coming up with solutions. The solutions is this motion, and you need to implement them.
Minister, I want to put this debate into context, and I want you to write down one figure. Up to 16 billion surplus. That's what we're talking about. And I'm going to read you an email I got recently from a constituent. I've never had any reason or inclination to contact any TDs or public representatives. However, the cost of living has left me at my lowest ebb ever. I'm on disability and I've had to choose between proper meals, turning the heat on. I go to the library most days to stay warm in daytime, and then I go to bed at 9 so I don't have to sit in the cold. Fuel allowances come to an end in 2 weeks, and unfortunately, we don't live in Spain, and most people need heating up to the end of May. The government removed 7 weeks of fuel allowance during the financial crisis and only restored 2 weeks over the last few budgets. Surely this should be restored at the very least. My electricity bill is still just over €1 per day. Allowance is €1 per day, despite the massive rise in our bills. Our bills went up hugely at the start of the Ukrainian war, but even though the markets have rallied and energy is still being purchased at close to pre-war levels, it's still not being passed on to the customer. Food shopping has increased. Bin charges went up hugely last year. Brown bins have now been charged. And I still remember, I was on Fingal County Council, and I remember that saying from Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Labour Party: you'll only pay for what you throw away. When it was privatised, you pay for everything. That's signed by disillusioned and hungry. Minister, I welcome your intervention. However, does anyone really believe that you'd be doing this meeting tomorrow if it wasn't for this motion and if it wasn't for the pressure that has been put on TDs from across the political spectrum by workers and families? This meeting, well, my understanding of it was the meeting was supposed to happen next month, and you brought it forward.
This meeting was called last week, Deputy.
Yeah.
Just for clarity.
Well, yeah, I have my doubts. I welcome that the government is not opposing this motion. However, I'm asking this government to go further than just appealing to those who have the power over what we pay at the checkouts. It's time for real action, and I do hope that you have real action and not just words from tomorrow's meeting.
Now we go to Deputy Matt Carthy, sharing with Deputy Gould and Deputy O'Reilly.
I'm sure many who are watching this debate, hearing that government are going to bring the big retailers around the table will be wondering where they had heard that before, because there's a record here when it comes to Irish people being fleeced. We saw it with the insurance company. We heard strong words from government, but very little action. In fact, it took Pearse Doherty several attempts to bring forward legislation that started to make a dent, and we're still paying among the highest insurance costs in the world while government sit on their hands. We've seen it throughout the period since the financial crash, when Irish customers were paying the highest variable mortgage interest rates in the European Union. On several occasions we had ministers saying we're going to talk to the banks. Again, very little done, other than, of course, Fine Gael changed the law to ensure that those same banks didn't have to pay any tax for 20 years. We've seen it in respect of rents going up time and time again, government doing nothing to stand up to those who were doing so. In terms of energy, we had a motion last week defeated by government that would have ensured that the energy companies who have made obscene profits would be forced to pay a windfall tax, and that we would put in place protections for consumers. Again, we hear that government will talk to the energy providers, but nothing actually done that makes a tangible difference to ordinary Irish families and workers. We've seen fuel prices escalating over a period of 2 years. Very little done, belatedly as a result of Sinn Féin pressure. Government reduced excise duty, but at the same time increased carbon tax. And now that fuel prices have started to reduce a little bit, what are you planning to do? Increase the excise duty again. There is never an opportunity that government aren't slow to face up to corporates, to vested interests, to big multinational corporations that are fleecing Irish workers and families, but you're never slow to penalise ordinary workers and families. The Sinn Féin motion tonight, we're told, is being accepted by government. That is a welcome first step, but the crucial step, Minister, is actually implementing what the motion calls for, forcing retailers to actually reduce their costs in line with the fact that their input costs have seen significant reductions, forcing the CCPC to do its job and actually protect Irish consumers and to face up to monopoly-like practices within the sector, and to do what we have been urging government to do in respect of the agri-food regulator. The Minister has, as a result of the pressure and amendments brought forward by Sinn Féin, improved the bill from where it first started, but it is nowhere near as strong as it needs to happen. They're the solutions, Minister. You've passed the motion, now implement the solutions.
Minister, €1,200 a year, that is the reality of the increase for ordinary people when they're facing their grocery bills. This, coupled with electricity sky-high rates, rising prices in rent, mortgage repayments, and couple this then with the increase in carbon tax that you put on ordinary people who are already struggling. They're at the pin of the collar, Minister, and what's your reaction at a time when people need help, when the country is awash with money? Why don't you step in? Yet, just to give you an example, in the last 6 months of 2022, Tesco's, they saw a profit in Ireland of 6.6%. In the budget in 2023, your government only gave pensioners a rise of 4%. Now, to be clear, grocery inflation is running at 17%. Minister, you do the maths. We can all do the maths. You're not giving people enough money, you're not giving people enough protection, and you're not giving people enough of help to tackle this crisis. And this isn't to mention about children. What are families going to do for the summer now when the kids are off school and people can't afford to pay their childminders, they can't afford to put their kids into summer camp, they can't afford the snacks and the treats that kids would be at all day long because they're struggling to put food on the table, they're struggling trying to manage their budgets. And Minister, you just ignore all this. Right? What we need is a government to stand up for the people. And at the end of the day, Minister, it's the people that put you here. And if you believe in that, and your government believes in that, well then your government should deliver for those people. What we're seeing now, this is a brilliant country to live in. If you're healthy, if you're wealthy, and if you're a homeowner. But if you're sick, you don't own your home and you don't have a good job or good assets, well, Minister, these are the people who are suffering. These are the ordinary people.
Count Corlin, I want to thank everyone who made a contribution to the debate this evening. Minister, workers, families, pensioners, carers, all of these groups, people on a fixed income, people on low incomes, people on modest and moderate incomes, are being absolutely creased. Rents are up, highest in Europe. Energy bills are up. The numbers in arrears with their electricity and their energy bills are spiralling out of control. There are over 160,000 households now in gas arrears. Mortgage interest rates are rising, and now grocery prices have risen to an unsustainable level. And I welcome that the government are not opposing this motion, but I would prefer to have heard from you what it is that you are prepared to do. You treated us to the greatest hits of stuff that you have done and all the pats on the backs that you're giving yourselves, but what are you actually going to do? You threw around the blame when you came in here. You blamed China, blamed COVID, blamed the invasion of Ukraine. All of these are contributing factors. All of these are things that are beyond your control. But what you can control, what you can do, and instead what we heard from Minister Richmond was he said he expects and he hopes that prices will come down. Well, I mean, we can all go home, light a candle, say a prayer, hope that prices come down, but you are the government. It's up to you to go in and stand up for people with these retailers tomorrow and demand that prices come down. And furthermore, tell them what you will do. So we heard the Minister come in here, he said, no, ruling out price caps. Tell them what you will do. Don't tell us how powerless you are. Don't tell us that you'd love to help, but you can't. And certainly do not tell people who are struggling to pay for their groceries what you say you have done for them already, because they are in dire straits, and they're in dire straits now. The reality for families is that some of them are dreading the summer. I spoke to a woman at the weekend, and she said, Jesus, when the summer comes, the kids will just eat and eat. There's one thing to have to say no to your kids if they want to go to the zoo or they want to trip out. That's tough, right? That's not nice. But you have to say no to your children for food. Now, if that doesn't spur you on to actually ensure that prices come down, and you're giving these retailers loads of time, I should come back to us in the middle of June, towards the end of June, see what you can do, lads, and come back. That's not good enough. That is not good enough. That's not what people want to hear. So when we say that the government are out of touch, this is what we mean. When we say that you just don't get it, this is what we mean. Because you say you hope that the prices will come down, and you expect that they might. But what are you going to do about it? How are you going to ensure that the prices do come down? The reality for working people, as outlined by the Unite Trade Union, is that in real terms, their wages have fallen by €76 on average per week. In real terms. That's the purchasing power that they now have when they're trying to buy food, nappies, whatever their family needs. They're down €76 on average a week. So telling them that you think their wages might go up next year or the year after or at some point in the future, it just speaks to how tone deaf you are. Because they are struggling now. They don't think about going to the supermarket in a year's time or 2 years' time, or sometime maybe when we have a government that actually has the interests of ordinary people at their heart. They have to go to the supermarket this week. They have to put stuff back, and we've all seen them. I don't know why you're blind to it when you go to your own shops, but I see it in mine. People saying to their kids, no, put that back. No, put that back. No, Mammy won't get that this week. And they get to the checkout and they're saying, I worked in a retailer's during the last recession and I know it only too well. You can see the signs. They have a reasonable thought in their head of how much their groceries are going to cost. But they're saying to the woman on the checkout, how much is it now? How much is it now? I'll leave that back. You go to the supermarket now and right beside every single checkout, there's essentials, not treats. And please don't tell people again to shop around. Jeez, they're doing that. They're shopping around, they're buying own brand. They are absolutely cut to the pin of their collar. So when we say you're out of touch, we mean you need to hear what people are going through. You need to understand that and you need to take action. Not just fine, sweet words, action. Go on, Michael.
Thank you, Deputy O'Reilly. So the question now is that the motion regarding food costs and high grocery bills be agreed to. Is that agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Thank you all very much.